The fluorescent lights at Denver International Airport buzzed overhead like they were counting down to something nobody wanted to admit. I stood near the baggage carousel watching my family move through the terminal, the way they always moved through life. Loud, polished, and completely unaware of the damage they left behind. My father, Greg Sullivan, walked 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Phone pressed to his ear, already conducting business before we'd even left Colorado. My stepmother, Diane, adjusted her oversized sunglasses like she was walking a runway instead of Terminal B. My half-sister, Megan, filmed herself with the kind of practiced ease that suggested she'd forgotten what it felt like to experience a moment without documenting it. And behind them all, moving with the slow dignity of a man who'd earned every gray hair on his head, was my grandfather, Robert Sullivan, Grandpa Bobby, as I'd called him since I could talk, 84 years old, retired ironworker from Pueblo, Colorado, with hands like leather gloves and a heart twice the size of his modest pension. He was carrying a duffel bag he'd probably owned since the Reagan administration, and wearing his good jacket, a corduroy blazer with patched elbows that Grandma Helen had bought him for their 40th anniversary, 2 years before the cancer took her. My name is Daniel Sullivan. I'm 29, and I teach 7th grade history at a middle school in Aurora. It doesn't pay much, but I love it. Love the way a kid's eyes light up when the past suddenly feels alive. Love the chaos and the questions and the moments when something actually clicks. My father has never understood this. To him, teaching is what you do when you've failed at everything else. But that's a conversation for another day. Because what happened at that airport, what my father did to my grandfather, made every disagreement we'd ever had look like a friendly debate. The Alaska trip had been Grandpa Bobby's idea. Not in the way my father tells it, where he generously included his elderly father in a family vacation. No, Grandpa had brought it up at Thanksgiving dinner, 8 months earlier, holding a crumpled magazine page he'd torn from a waiting room copy of National Geographic. It showed the northern lights over Fairbanks, green and purple ribbons painted across a sky so dark it looked like velvet. Helen and I always said we'd see the aurora before we died, he'd said, smoothing the page against the tablecloth. She didn't make it, but I'd still like to go. Maybe we could all go together. Make it a family thing. The table had gone quiet the way it always did when Grandpa said something that required actual emotional engagement. My father had exchanged a glance with Diane, one of those married couple looks that communicates entire conversations in a single second. Megan had kept scrolling her phone. I'd been the only one who smiled. Dad, Alaska in February is brutal, my father had said, using his reasonable voice, the one he deployed on reluctant clients at his real estate firm. It's -30. The roads are sheets of ice, and you'd need gear. Serious gear, not just a coat. I've worked construction in January in Pueblo, Grandpa had replied. I think I can handle cold. It's also quite an investment, Diane had added, her voice dripping with the particular sweetness she reserved for conversations about money. The lodges near Fairbanks charge a fortune during Aurora season. I have money, Grandpa had said. And then, quieter, Helen's life insurance. I've barely touched it. Didn't feel right spending it on myself. But this was our dream. Using it for this feels like keeping a promise. That word promise had hung in the air like smoke. My grandmother had been gone 7 years. 7 years of Grandpa living alone in the little house on Berkeley Avenue, eating dinners for one, keeping her garden alive even though he'd never cared about flowers. He'd held on to that life insurance money like it was sacred, turning down new cars and home repairs because the money was earmarked for something that mattered. My father, to his credit or what passed for credit, had agreed. Fine, he'd said, already pulling out his phone. I'll handle the logistics. You just send me the funds and I'll book everything. Flights, lodges, guides, the whole package. Grandpa had written him a check for $22,000 the next morning. I know because I saw the carbon copy in his checkbook when I visited that weekend. $22,000, every penny of Grandma Helen's life insurance, plus 3 years of Social Security savings he'd squirreled away by eating store-brand everything and keeping the thermostat at 62 all winter. Over the next 8 months, I watched my grandfather prepare for this trip with the dedication of a man who believed in second chances. He bought thermal underwear and insulated boots from the Army surplus store. He researched the science behind the aurora borealis, filling a notebook with diagrams and optimal viewing conditions. He even got a new pair of glasses so he could see the colors properly. Every time I visited, there was some new detail: a pamphlet about dog sledding, a printout about ice fishing, A highlighted passage about the indigenous Athabascan people whose land we'd be visiting. Your grandmother would have loved this, he told me one afternoon, showing me a YouTube video of the northern lights while we ate soup from cans in his kitchen. She always said the sky was God's best painting. Imagine what she'd say about this one. Meanwhile, the rest of my family prepared in their own way. My father upgraded their flights to first class without mentioning it to Grandpa. Diane shopped for designer parkas that cost more than Grandpa's monthly income. Megan planned content Alaska aesthetic. She called it, as if an entire state existed primarily as a backdrop for her social media presence. Nobody asked Grandpa what he wanted to see. Nobody included him in the group text about dinner reservations. When I pointed this out, my father told me I was being sensitive. Now here we were, February 19th. Denver International, connecting to Anchorage via Seattle. Grandpa had arrived 2 hours early because he'd never flown first class and didn't want to hold anyone up. He'd ironed his good jacket. He was carrying a Ziploc bag of homemade beef jerky because he wasn't sure he'd like airplane food, and tucked into his breast pocket, where he kept everything important, was the magazine page with the Northern Lights laminated now, edges worn soft from months of handling. We approached the Alaska Airlines counter as a group, my father leading with the authority of a man who'd flown 200,000 miles on his corporate card. He handed over passports and IDs with mechanical efficiency, rattling off confirmation numbers from memory. Sullivan Party, 5 passengers to Anchorage via Seattle. The agent typed, frowned, typed again. I'm showing 4 passengers on this reservation, sir. Greg Sullivan, Diane Sullivan, Megan Sullivan, Daniel Sullivan. No 5th passenger. My father's hand froze halfway to his wallet. That's not right. There should be 5. Robert Sullivan. My father. More typing. The agent shook her head. There's no Robert Sullivan anywhere in this booking. No record at all. Do you have a separate confirmation number for him? Patricia. The folder, my father said, snapping his fingers at Diane like she was an assistant rather than his wife. The folder with all the documents. You said you had everything digitally, Diane replied, already defensive. What followed was 15 minutes of my father performing confusion. I call it performing because I've known this man my entire life. And Greg Sullivan does not make administrative mistakes. This is a man who once caught a $6 accounting error in a $3 million closing deal. A man who color codes his calendar and triple confirms every dinner reservation. The idea that he simply forgot to book his own father's ticket was about as plausible as forgetting to breathe. This must be a system error, he kept saying. I booked 5 tickets. I'm absolutely certain, but his eyes told a different story. They darted not with panic, but with calculation. The micro-movements of a man running scenarios, not searching for answers. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside, the agent said. The flight board's in 90 minutes. If you'd like to try purchasing a ticket now. What's the availability? I asked. The Anchorage flight is oversold. We have a wait list, but I wouldn't count on it. Next available? Thursday afternoon. 2 days from now. I watched my grandfather during all of this. He stood slightly behind the family, the way he always stood close enough to be present, far enough not to impose. His hand had gone to his breast pocket, fingers pressing against the laminated magazine page like a talisman. Well, my father said, exhaling heavily, this is a disaster. But we can't miss the opening night with the guide service. The aurora forecast is perfect for tomorrow. Bobby, the best thing is probably for you two. Where's the money? I said. My father blinked. What? Grandpa gave you $22,000. For 5 tickets, 5 sets of lodge reservations, 5 everything. If his ticket was never purchased, where's his $22,000? Daniel, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. You're standing here telling a man who gave you his dead wife's life insurance money that oops, you forgot to buy his ticket. So where is it? The terminal seemed to contract around us. Megan lowered her phone. Diane studied the floor. My father's jaw tightened the way it did when he was cornered not with guilt, but with anger at being caught. The money was pooled into the trip fund, he said carefully. Lodge upgrades, the private guide service, the helicopter tour. The helicopter tour Grandpa didn't know about? I said. The lodge upgrade he never asked for? You took his money, used it to make your vacation more luxurious, and never booked him a single thing. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I pulled out my phone, Opened the banking app where Grandpa had added me as an authorized viewer on his account after Grandma died. $22,000, transferred March 15th. I can show the receipt. Can you show me the corresponding booking? My father said nothing. Can you show me anything? A confirmation email, a receipt, a single piece of evidence that you ever intended to bring him? How dare you speak to me like this in public? How dare you steal from your own father? The word steal landed like a slap. Grandpa flinched. Diane put a hand on my father's arm. Megan actually put her phone away. Bobby, my father said, turning to Grandpa with the manufactured warmth of a salesman closing on a reluctant buyer. I promise we'll sort this out. You go home, rest up, and I'll make some calls from Anchorage. Don't, Grandpa said quietly. It was the first word he'd spoken since the agent dropped the news. Don't make promises you don't intend to keep, Greg. Your mother hated that, and so do I. Dad. I heard every word Daniel said. And I'm not surprised. Disappointed, but not surprised. He looked at my father with eyes that held 60 years of loving a son who'd spent most of those years being embarrassed by where he came from. I just wish you'd told me to my face instead of letting me stand in an airport in my good jacket feeling like a fool. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once in his life, Greg Sullivan had no pitch. Final boarding call for Alaska Airlines flight prior to Seattle, the intercom announced. Go, Grandpa said. Take your trip. Enjoy the helicopter. My father gathered his carry-on. Diane and Megan fell into formation behind him. At the edge of the security line, he paused and looked back not at Grandpa but at me. Coming? He asked. I looked at my grandfather standing alone by the Alaska Airlines counter, 84 years old in his patched blazer, beef jerky in one hand, broken dream in the other. I thought about Grandma Helen, who'd been more of a parent to me than either of my biological ones, who taught me that character was what you did when nobody was watching, and that love was a verb, not a feeling. No, I said. I'm staying with him. My father's face went through something I'd never seen before, a crack in the performance. A flash of something that might have been shame before it was buried under 30 years of practiced indifference. Then you're on your own, he said. And they walked away. The drive back to Pueblo took 2 hours. Grandpa didn't speak for the first 45 minutes. Just stared out the window at the February plains, brown and frozen under a sky that seemed too big for the emptiness underneath it. I didn't push. Some silences need to be honored. Finally, as we passed the exit for Fountain, he spoke. Your grandmother would have been furious. At Dad? At me? For giving that man my money without a contract. She always said Greg had more ambition than integrity. He paused. She wasn't wrong. We're getting that money back, I said. Danny, I don't want to fight. It's not a fight. It's math. He took $22,000 for services he never provided. That's not a family dispute, that's fraud. He was quiet again. Then, you gave up Alaska for me. I gave up Alaska with them. That's different. The Northern Lights, though. You were excited. The Northern Lights happen every year. You only get so many chances to do the right thing. His hand found mine on the center console. His grip was still strong, ironworker strong, but it trembled in a way it hadn't a year ago. You're a good man, Danny. Better than I deserve. I learned from the best. We got to his house as the sun was setting, painting the sky over Pueblo in shades of copper and rust. The house looked the way it always looked, small, tidy, lived in. Grandma's wind chimes still hung on the porch. Her rose bushes, pruned and dormant for winter, lined the walkway like sleeping sentinels. Inside, the Alaska research was everywhere. Maps pinned to the kitchen wall, a borrowed library book on Arctic survival sitting on the coffee table, the notebook full of aurora diagrams open to a page about solar wind patterns. I made us dinner, nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, while Grandpa sat in his recliner and methodically removed every Alaska-related item from the living room, not angrily, gently. The way you clean up after something that died. Grandpa, I said, setting his plate on the TV tray. What if we still went? To Alaska? Danny, I can't afford. Not Alaska. Somewhere else. Somewhere the Northern Lights are just as good, but nobody in this family would think to look for us. He raised an eyebrow. Where? I pulled up a website on my phone. Iceland. The aurora season runs through March. There are these tiny guest houses in the countryside, not luxury, but warm and real. Hot springs you can sit in while you watch the sky. The whole trip, flights, lodging, food, would run about $4,000 for both of us. 4,000, he repeated. The number clearly landed differently than 22,000. I've got savings. Teacher savings, so it's not a fortune, but it's enough. We split it down the middle, fly out of Denver next Tuesday. 10 days. Just us. He looked at the blank spaces on his wall where the Alaska maps had hung. Then at Grandma's photo on the mantel, the one from their wedding, both of them so young it hurt to look at. Helen always said Iceland was where the elves lived, he murmured. Read it in some book. Said she wanted to find one. Then let's go find one for her. He smiled. Not the polite smile he wore at family events, the one designed to take up as little space as possible. A real smile, the kind that rearranged his whole face. Tuesday, he said. I'll be ready. We landed in Reykjavik on a Wednesday morning, stepping off the plane into air so clean it felt like drinking glacier water through your lungs. Grandpa paused on the jet bridge, eyes wide, breathing deeply. Smells like the beginning of something, he said. The next 10 days dismantled every assumption I'd ever made about my grandfather. This man, whom my father described as fragile and confused, and not up for travel, adapted to Iceland with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime making do with whatever life handed him. He didn't complain about the bumpy roads or the tiny guesthouse rooms or the food that was, admittedly, an acquired taste. He ate fermented shark without flinching, grinning at my horror. He soaked in geothermal hot springs at midnight, steam rising around him like a blessing, telling me stories about building bridges in weather that would have killed lesser men. On our fourth night, we drove to Thingvellir National Park and spread a blanket on frozen ground. The sky was clear and enormous, not the washed-out gray of Denver or the light-polluted haze of any American city, but pure, depthless darkness, the kind that reminds you how small you are and how little that matters. And then they came. The light started as a smudge of green near the horizon, so faint I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Then they grew, unfurling across the sky like something alive, like God was shaking out a curtain made of emeralds and silk. Green bled into purple, purple into white. They moved in waves, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Grandpa didn't speak. He sat on that frozen blanket in his army surplus thermals and his patched blazer. Yes, he'd insisted on wearing the blazer, and he watched the sky with tears running silently down his weathered face. After a long time, he pulled the laminated magazine page from his pocket, held it up against the real thing. The picture was a pale shadow of what hung above us, the way a photograph of an ocean is nothing compared to standing in the waves. We made it, Helen, he whispered. It's even better than we thought. I put my arm around him and we sat there, two Sullivans a long way from Colorado, watching the sky do impossible things. And I understood something I'd been too young to grasp before, that promises aren't just about keeping your word. They're about carrying someone's dreams forward even after they're gone. We spent 3 more days exploring the countryside. Grandpa befriended everyone: the guest house owner who taught him to say thank you in Icelandic, the fishing boat captain who let him steer through a fjord, the elderly woman at a wool shop who showed him how to knit a traditional pattern, because he said Grandma Helen had always tried to teach him, and he'd always been too stubborn to learn. I'm going to finish a scarf, he told me, needles clicking awkwardly in his massive ironworker hands. Put it on her grave when we get home. On our last night, we were eating lamb stew in a tiny restaurant in Akureyri when the woman at the next table introduced herself. Her name was Margaret Yoon, 77, retired music teacher from Portland, Oregon, traveling alone because her daughters had told her she was too old for international travel. They actually used those words. Grandpa asked, and something in his voice, recognition, shared pain, made Margaret's eyes soften. They hired a home aide while I was gone, she said. Like I need a babysitter. I've been teaching teenagers Beethoven for 40 years. I think I can handle a rental car in Iceland. They talked for 3 hours. I mostly listened, watching two strangers become friends over the shared experience of being underestimated by the people who were supposed to love them most. Margaret had seen the Northern Lights too, from a different spot, alone, and when Grandpa showed her his photos, she showed him hers, and they compared them like proud parents showing off grandchildren. You know what kills me? Margaret said as we walked back to our guest house under a sky full of stars. It's not the disrespect. It's the waste. We have so much life left, so many things to give, and they've already written our eulogies. They've already decided our story is over. Maybe we need to write a different story, Grandpa said. And the way he said it quiet. Certain told me he'd been thinking about this for longer than just tonight. We flew home to Colorado, and I assumed that would be the end of it, a beautiful trip, a healed wound, a memory to carry forward. But Grandpa had other plans. 3 days after we landed, he called me at 7 in the morning. "Danny, I need you to come over. And bring your laptop." I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, the knitting needles and half-finished scarf pushed to one side. Margaret was there too, on speakerphone from Portland, her voice tinny but animated. "Tell him, Bobby," she said. Grandpa straightened in his chair, and I saw something in his posture I hadn't seen in years. Purpose. Margaret and I have been talking about what we said in Akureyri, about all the people, like us seniors with dreams and savings and perfectly good health, being told to sit down and wait to die. He pushed a piece of paper toward me. On it, in his careful handwriting, were the words Northern Light Journeys. We want to start a travel group. Not a company exactly, more like a club. Seniors traveling together, planning trips together, proving that 80 isn't the end of the story. Bobby handles the spirit, Margaret added. I handle the logistics. We just need someone who understands money. They both looked at me. I'm a 7th grade history teacher, I said. Exactly. Grandpa grinned. You know how to make boring things exciting. That's half of selling anything. I laughed, really laughed for the first time since the airport. You're serious. As a heart attack, he said, then winced. Poor choice of words at my age. But yes, dead serious. Margaret flew to Pueblo the following week. Watching her and Grandpa work together was like watching two instruments find harmony. Her organizational precision balanced his storytelling warmth. They mapped out a first trip. Iceland in October, during peak aurora season, 8 travelers maximum, all over 70. A 10-day itinerary built around wonder rather than luxury. They posted about it on a senior travel forum Margaret belonged to. Within 48 hours, they had 23 applications. Meanwhile, the situation with my father resolved itself the way things do when lawyers get involved. I'd consulted a colleague whose wife practiced elder law, and a carefully worded letter secured the return of Grandpa's $22,000 within 3 weeks. My father never apologized. He sent the money via wire transfer with a memo line that read family matter resolved. Clinical, bloodless, exactly who he was. Megan texted me once. Dad says you're poisoning Grandpa against us. That's not fair. I didn't respond. Fair had left the building the moment our grandfather stood alone in an airport holding a laminated picture of something he'd never get to see with the family that was supposed to love him. Except he did see it. With me. And now he was going to help other people see it too. Northern Light Journeys launched its first trip on October 4th. 8 travelers, ages 71 to 88, flew from various American cities to Reykjavik. Grandpa and Margaret met them at the airport holding a hand-painted sign. I came along as unofficial photographer and very official financial manager. The group was extraordinary. A retired firefighter from Detroit who'd always wanted to see glaciers. A former librarian from Savannah who spoke 4 languages and had never used any of them outside Georgia. A widower from Tucson who'd been eating dinner alone for 9 years and couldn't remember the last time someone had asked about his day. They came from different places and different stories, but they shared something fundamental, the experience of being told their best days were behind them, and the stubborn refusal to believe it. On the 3rd night, we drove to our viewing spot, the same field in Thingvellir, where Grandpa and I had watched the lights 10 months earlier. We spread blankets and poured hot chocolate from thermoses and waited. When the aurora appeared, nobody spoke. 8 people who'd been told they were too old for adventure sat on frozen ground in a foreign country and watched the sky catch fire. The retired firefighter cried. The librarian whispered poetry in French. The widower from Tucson held Margaret's hand like he'd found something he'd lost a long time ago. And Grandpa Bobby stood at the edge of the group, looking up, the laminated magazine page tucked against his heart. He didn't need to hold it up for comparison this time. He already knew the real thing was better than any picture. He already knew that some promises take the long way around but arrive exactly when they're supposed to. Helen, he said softly, and the name floated up toward the lights like a prayer. I brought friends this time. That was a year ago. Northern Light Journeys has run 7 trips now. Iceland, New Zealand, the Norwegian fjords, the coast of Portugal. Grandpa and Margaret handle it together, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose, and something else that neither of them has named yet, but that makes them both stand a little taller. He's 85 now. She's 78. They argue about itineraries and agree about everything that matters. My father has not spoken to Grandpa since the airport. Hasn't called. Hasn't visited. Hasn't acknowledged that his father built something beautiful from the wreckage of his betrayal. Last Thanksgiving, Grandpa hosted dinner at the house on Berkeley Avenue, not for blood family, but for Northern Light alumni. 14 people around a table meant for 6, eating food that nobody's Instagram needed to validate. Margaret brought homemade rolls. The firefighter from Detroit carved the turkey. The widower from Tucson told a joke so bad that everyone laughed for 5 minutes straight. I sat next to Grandpa, watching this room full of strangers turned family, and I thought about what he'd said in Iceland about writing a different story. That's exactly what he'd done. Not a revenge story or a tragedy, but something better, a story about discovering that the people who underestimate you are not the ones who define you. Last week, he called me with news. Pack your bags, Danny. We're going to Norway in March. The group's full, but I saved you a spot. Oh, and Margaret says, bring warm socks. Apparently mine aren't up to her standards. I'll be there, I said. Good. Oh, and Danny? One more thing. His voice got quiet the way it does when he's about to say something that matters. Thank you for staying with me at that airport, for choosing me. Grandpa, you never have to thank me for that. Yes, I do, because you could have gotten on that plane. You could have had Alaska with your father and a perfectly comfortable life of pretending everything was fine. Instead, you stayed, and because you stayed, I found the Northern Lights. I found Margaret. I found a reason to get out of bed in the morning that isn't just waiting for the next thing to go wrong. He paused. Your grandmother sent me a good one when she sent me you. I couldn't speak for a moment. When I could, I said, she sent me a good one too. Now I'm sitting in the living room of the house on Berkeley Avenue, watching Grandpa attempt to finish that knitting project he started in Iceland, the scarf for Grandma's grave. It's lopsided and too long and the stitches are uneven. But he works on it every evening with the same hands that bent steel for 40 years. The same patience he used to teach me how to throw a baseball, the same love he's carried for a woman who's been gone 7 years but never really left. On the wall behind him, the Alaska maps are back. Not the same ones, new ones, printed on better paper, marked with new routes. Northern Light Journeys is adding Alaska to next year's schedule. Grandpa insisted, we're going to see Fairbanks the way your grandmother dreamed it, he told me. Not first class, not luxury lodges, just the sky and the cold and people brave enough to look up. The laminated magazine page sits in a frame on the mantel now, right next to Grandma Helen's wedding photo. 2 dreams, side by side, one that was promised and one that was kept, and hanging from a hook by the front door, ready for the next journey, is that old corduroy blazer with the patched elbows. Still fits him perfectly. Thank you for listening to my story. If you know what it's like to be overlooked by the people who should see you most clearly, if you've ever chosen the harder right over the easier wrong, then you know these aren't just stories. They're the truth we carry. Subscribe if these words found you at the right time. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. And leave me a comment, tell me about the person in your life who deserved better and what you did about it. Your stories matter. Every single one. Until next time, take care of your people, especially the ones the world has decided to forget.